Hello and welcome to IMA's Inside Talk webinar series. The title of today's presentation is Why Data is the Core to a Future Finance Architecture, sponsored by Aptitude Software. I'm Adam Larson, and I'll be your host for today's Inside Talk webinar. So today it's our pleasure to have Terry Mormile as part of our program, and she'll be serving as moderator for today's event. Terry is the Director of International Education and Career Services in the Education and Career Services area at IMA. In this position, Terry leads a variety of new product initiatives, including the development of IMA's Strategy and Competitive Analysis Learning Series and the expansion of the Career Driver product offering. She is part of a team responsible for IMA's continuing education product line in alignment with IMA's broader mission to provide education value and knowledge to its members. Hi, Terry. Welcome to our program.
Thanks, Adam. I'm pleased to be part of the IMA Inside Talk webinar series, and on behalf of IMA, I welcome everyone to today's session. At this time, I would like to introduce our first featured presenter for today's program. With us today, we have Nick Shaw. Nick is the Senior Vice President of Finance Digitization at Aptitude Software. He brings over 20 years of experience in financial services and spent the last decade with HSBC, most recently leading their finance cloud transformation program. To learn more about Nick, please take a look at the speaker bio section of your console. Please join me in welcoming Nick.
Thank you. It's great. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here to discuss this important topic with your members today.
Next, I would like to introduce our second featured presenter for today's program, Alan Berkeley. Alan is the Director of Business Architecture for Aptitude Finance Digitization Program. Alan focuses on the future needs of CFOs and finance departments and how technology can best enable a truly forward-looking finance function. In doing so, he leverages 6+ years designing solutions used in finance departments across a wide variety of industries and over 11 years working in finance departments of Tier 1 investment banks. Alan is also an Associate Chartered Management Accountant. You may learn more about Alan in the speaker bio section of your console. Please join me in welcoming Alan Berkeley.
Thanks, Terry. Delighted to be here today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Before turning the presentation over to our first speaker, I would like to go over the learning objectives for today's program. After participating in this webinar, you will discover why data is the key to a modern finance function. You should be able to explain the criticality of a subledger in the finance architecture. You should also be able to recognize the importance of the finance team's ownership of accounting data flows. You will also be able to identify how different data types should be treated in a finance architecture. And finally, you will be able to summarize the 3 key parts of an ideal finance architecture: control, automation, and transparency. We're looking forward to an informative presentation, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to begin.
Thank you, Terry. So myself and Alan today are going to cover quite a few agenda items, and obviously we're going to focus in on finance architecture and the importance of data within it. But before we get into some of the details around that, I thought it'd be good to just take a little bit of a step back and just assess where a finance teams, finance functions are, and just understanding that the broader environment that finance is operating within. What we're finding is we're seeing a lot of organizations obviously embark on transformation and digital transformation journeys, looking to really evolve their finance functions. And I guess we always categorize the drivers for change into 3 key areas. One is having a better finance function. Secondly, having a cheaper to run finance function. And then third is a faster finance function. Now, generally what that translates into is, when we talk about better, we're looking heavily at obviously an improved controls environment, better outputs, better outcomes, better analytics that drive transformation outcomes. We're looking at cost, obviously, from a perspective of how much time is spent on manual activities, things that generally aren't value-add activities, but really looking at how do we ensure resources and the effort that's spent in finance is spent on the real value-add activities. And then finally, faster, finance functions have traditionally always focused on what's happened in the last month, what's happened in the last period, and had taken a considerable amount of time to finalize the accounting, the statutory reporting, the regulatory reporting, and so on. So really, how do you start to improve the service that you provide to your stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are external stakeholders, whether regulators, shareholders, or obviously internal stakeholders as well to a finance function. Now, as finance functions obviously embark on those transformation journeys, a large part of what we'll look at is, are we actually focusing on the right problem? What's key to a transformation program is obviously understanding you have a massive scope, huge areas of improvements that can be made in finance functions, but where do you start your transformation? So we'll talk a little bit around that and where we see some failings within finance transformations, but then also where we believe the real value add is. It's important to obviously understand how technology and data fit into that transformation journey, whether that's looking at it from a source to report perspective and making sure you've got the right controls, transparency around your data and your architecture. And then we'll also then touch a little bit on where we see the finance architecture evolving over the next few years and how to then obviously take that forward in terms of implementation activity as well. So that's what we're hoping to cover with you today. Just a quick overview of Aptitude Software. We specialize in providing digital finance and subscription management software, heavily focused around the office of the CFO and working obviously with a number of global clients on finance transformation initiatives. Okay, I see we've arrived at our first poll question to kick us off. Terry, I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thank you. Attendees should see the first polling question now open on your screen. If you cannot see the question, please refresh your browser, which should correct the issue. I would like to remind everyone that you may begin responding as soon as you see the question on your screen. Our first polling question is, which is the biggest challenge facing your finance team as it relates to systems? A, lack of business agility due to legacy and siloed systems. B, increasingly high cost and maintenance requirements of legacy systems. C, time spent on manual processes and workarounds. D, lack of confidence in the accuracy of finance data. Please note that after selecting an answer, you must click the Submit button, which is located on the right side of your screen.
I think this is a really interesting question. We've positioned this quite early on in the presentation because we understand, obviously, depending on the organization you're working at, each of the finance functions is very different. It's obviously very individual to each department. I know I've got a view on where I think a lot of the major challenge lies, even though a number of these will be challenges. I don't know, Alan, from your experience, if you have a certain inclination in terms of where you see the impacts.
I think it very much depends on the type and also the age of organization that you're working in. So you'll often see the older, more established companies will be suffering with the legacy systems and the high costs of those systems. They may also have manual workarounds, but you're, I think, much more likely to find the manual processes in the smaller or newer companies, which have been running to keep up with the growth of their business and haven't yet maybe implemented the end-to-end systems and controls that they would ideally like to see automated. So it'll be interesting to see what the results of the poll are. And I guess we won't be able to segment them in that way, but I do expect to see a spread, and I think it will depend on what type of company you're coming from.
Okay.
Let's see what our audience says.
There we are. So so time spent on manual processes and workarounds, which is I think where we would have expected it, and particularly from obviously the group we're talking to today, which will be finance professionals working in the finance department, is where a lot of frustration also is in terms of the amount of time that's spent on workarounds or the end user computing type solutions to where functionality is not catered for in systems. So no surprise there, and that also is one of the biggest hindrances to transformation, is really understanding what the current state is, the current processes, why those manual workarounds are in place, and how do you actually work to remove them. And that's obviously a very difficult journey to embark on. Second, obviously, as Alan was referring to a second ago, obviously around the legacy and siloed systems, which will absolutely be prevalent in some of the more organizations with a longer history. Organizations that have grown through acquisition, I think, as well, would also be impacted by that, where they may have a lot more siloed impacts. Interestingly, and Alan, I'll take your observation, lack of confidence in the accuracy of finance data has scored relatively low.
I was going to call that out as well. I think that's great. I do think that it's interesting that this is from people who we are assuming are working in finance departments. So you would hope that they've got confidence in their own data. It would be interesting to see if all their stakeholders had the same perspective. But it also might be that that's just not the challenge that's being faced. You would expect, I mean, everyone's only been able to select one, but you would expect that if there is a large amount of time being spent on manual processes and workarounds, that the confidence in the finance data would not be too high, just by nature of the processes being so manual, or at least not being straight through processing. Having said that, it doesn't surprise me that that is the biggest challenge that's being called out here, because I've yet to come across anyone who went into accountancy to sit and do reconciliations or post manual journals. That's not really what gets people's juices flowing, and it's unsurprising that that is such a pain point for people.
Yep. Okay, so if we move back to our agenda now, so as on the agenda, the first question we ask is: are CFOs, and not just CFOs, but I guess finance functions in general and transformation programs, focusing in on the right areas? So, what we've shown here is a diagram, obviously, in terms of the various areas. Now, obviously, as a transformation of a finance function, what I spoke about earlier was a little bit around the need to focus a lot more on analytics, advanced analytics. There's obviously a huge amount of technology enablement in that area. There's a lot of new tools availability for finance professionals to really start providing a value add service to their business, internally and externally, moving away from finance being the custodians of the annual report and account, or the statutory reporting, the balance sheet, the P&L, and really getting to a point where you are able to help with business decisions that need to be taken based off either being able to forecast your finances into future periods, understanding what the impacts are of certain business decisions, and really acting as a business partner. Now, what we see with transformation programs is it's very easy to start by looking at your reporting, your analytics, your new advanced technologies, and thinking, hey, these are all great. We've got to invest in them. We've got to get them up and running quite quickly in order to deliver our benefits in the quickest time frame possible. Now, the main challenge we've seen with that is, unless you've got your foundations towards the bottom of this pyramid, right, it's really, really difficult to really implement successfully and deliver on your benefits and your business outcomes the tools and the technologies you need to support reporting analytics. So we've always recommended around this is, when you embark on that transformation journey, you really do need to understand your current states. You need to understand where you are with your existing data, your data sources, making sure you can get to that single view of finance data, so that each finance use case and process is then able to leverage that single data set. Alongside that, a finance function still has to remember its basics. It has to get its processes, its controls absolutely spot on. It was interesting on the poll question as well when we spoke about finance data and are we confident in the underlying accuracy of our finance data. That's where the controls comes into it, because actually having that highly controlled environment, the right auditability and transparency will support that view. So, I think our recommendation always around this is, finance functions, transformation programs really do need to focus in on the data architecture and making sure they've got that correct before you can then advance into looking at some of the areas such as reporting analytics. Okay, so at that stage, we've spoken a little bit around the importance of data. Alan, do you want to just talk to us a little bit around why data is so important to a finance function and how that then manifests itself into a sort of finance architecture view?
Absolutely. So I think when people think about finance, they automatically think about journals and balances, debits and credits, getting your accounts correct. And that's obviously critical. But all that is a set of data. It's an accounting set of data, it's a financial set of data, but it's data. And as well as having the numbers right, the balance is correct, you've got all the associated data on your journal lines and related non-financial data within your finance environment that either drives some of that reporting and some of that journalization process, or is critical to the ultimate summarization and reporting externally or even internally to management or internal stakeholders that can't be done simply from an aggregation of your journals and balances, but has to be unified together with the other aspects of the data within the organization to make the numbers meaningful and to make the insights useful for people. So really, finance is all about data. They focus very closely on getting one specific type of data correct. But to be the best they can be, they have to get all types of data correct and ensure that they're all accurate and ensure that they're all usable, accessible, and well controlled. So if we were to look at a summarized version of finance architecture, I suspect that the top 2/3 of this diagram will look familiar to most people on the call. It's what we're calling, I think what would be accepted to be commonly known as traditional finance architecture. You've got the source systems from all around your business sending in the inputs as to what the actual real world transactions are. You have some sort of engine that contains your accounting rules and generates your debits and credits. Those will feed into your subledger, where those will be stored, they will be entered into the correct accounts, they'll be controlled, they will be able to create balances off the back of those, and you'll have associated processing within the subledger, often around FX or maybe further allocations to shred things out to the appropriate divisions. And then we have the aggregation from there, from the granular detail within the subledger into the summarized view used in the general ledger. And off the back of that, the various different types of reporting, statutory, regulatory, management information, management reporting, and hopefully analytics as well. And that's been the case for, I would say, probably 30 years or more in terms of the way that finance architecture is traditionally created and managed within larger organizations. And in the past 15, maybe 20 years, we've seen additional data storage solutions start to be implemented. Although I would say they've not always been done consistently across the market. So we're seeing data warehouses in some instances, we're seeing enterprise-wide data lakes in other instances, and these have been driven largely by two factors. One is the vast increase in volume of data that companies and finance departments are having to handle, particularly driven by the digitization of transactions, the internet, the volume of transactions that you're seeing happen. Anecdotally, in speaking to a major European bank, they were saying that with the advent of tapping your card instead of having to swipe it or paying cash on transactions, the number of transactions that they saw going through their retail business increased something like tenfold, because everyone's tapping away, and each one of those transactions then feeds into the bank, as opposed to someone going and withdrawing $100 from the ATM and then just spending that as they go. So huge increase in volumes, and the other part of that is actually from a technological perspective, which is the constantly reducing costs in terms of data storage and the tools available for storing and then reporting on those data, on that data, and certainly the advent of cloud data storage has accelerated that further. And really, the question I think that we should all be asking ourselves is, are these the right solutions? And if they are the right solutions, how do they interact with your traditional finance architecture? If you've got your journals and balances in the subledger, do you need them? Do you want them in a data warehouse or a data lake as well? If you're putting them into a data warehouse or a data lake, who owns them? What are the controls on the data in those systems? What should the flow of data be? Does it have to go from the subledger to the data warehouse and back to the general ledger? Does it go from the subledger to the general ledger and the subledger to the data warehouse? Where should your reporting and analytics come from? Should it be from the GL or from the data warehouse? These might not sound like important questions, but when you're looking to ensure that you have consistent, accurate data, and that you're always comparing apples with apples, then these design decisions really are critical. Which parts of your organization, not necessarily just your finance organization, but your wider organization, which parts of that organization access data from the different systems, and for what purpose? And are you going to end up with potentially two different people looking at what they think is the same data set from two different systems and getting the differing answers? So there's not necessarily one correct answer for every organization, but I think there is absolutely a correct approach for every organization, which is to make sure that up front, when they are undergoing a finance transformation, they consider how they want their data to flow and why they want their data to flow in that manner, and the purpose of each of the different portions of their architecture.
And Alan, just to interject there, you spoke really well around the growth in data, and that's really important. I think also the growth on the right hand side in terms of, if you're in a regulated industry like banking or insurance, the growth in statutory and regulatory requirements has been immense over the past 10 to 15 years. There's obviously a thirst for more data on the on all the outputs, the granularity of them. However, and using my experience, and I'll maybe show my age a little bit here, but when I started off in finance, it was the general ledger was very simple. It was there to produce a balance sheet and a P&L and a cash flow statement or an income statement at the end of the month. And as a finance function, it was highly aggregated and you were done. Now, as we start to look at that growth of data and what it means from a finance architecture perspective, can you talk a little bit around why the general ledger still remains as absolutely critical to a finance function? And then secondly, maybe just expand on the difference between the sub-ledger and the general ledger.
Sure. So I think to discuss why the general ledger is important, you actually should start with the sub-ledger. And the purpose of the sub-ledger really is to store all your data. So to store all your financial data at the most granular level. When we were talking about at the start, we looked at the pyramid of different types of requirements of the finance organization has. Really, you can only enable proper analytics or the advanced analytics if you have that granular level of data. And that's what the sub-ledger is absolutely perfectly placed to provide. You can have a plethora of accounts, you can have very wide journal lines with a whole lot of attributes on them, and you can have it in a very well controlled, very structured, bespoke system that is designed to ensure finance quality data and enable audits, enable reporting, etc. off the back of it. However, whilst that is ideal for your analytics, it's not necessarily ideal for your aggregated reporting. And the general ledger is there to enable your aggregated statutory regulatory reporting, particularly when you're looking at large organizations with multiple entities, multiple business units, and multiple strands to that organization. The general ledger is really key in pulling all that data together, but at an aggregated level. So you're starting to summarize your accounts into groups of accounts at the general ledger level, and that will really drive a consolidated view of the high level balance sheet, P&L, as required for your external reporting. And it does that in a very different way to the sub-ledger. It also means that you save to an extent on your data storage, on your processing, because you're doing it over a smaller set of data ultimately. But the sub-ledger is where I would expect that financial controllers and accountants are probably spending most of their time. So it'd be analyzing the data, hopefully not correcting, hopefully just analyzing the data from their sub-ledger. And really it's going to be the general ledger data that hopefully should just flow out the back of that, but should enable much faster and easier aggregated reporting.
And I think one of the things I've seen over the years is, as that explosion in data has occurred, a number of institutions have tried to expand out their general ledger and to capture that information. And often after a while, that may have worked for the initial sort of the first parts of additional data granularity. But as more and more requests have come in for that data, it's become harder and harder for general ledgers to remain agile and continue to provide that level of granularity that's needed, but still continue to be the audited, reconciled, aggregated results that you need. Okay, I think that brings us to our second poll question. Terry.
Thank you. Attendees should see the second polling question now open on your screen. If you cannot see it, please refresh your browser. I'd like to remind everyone you may begin responding as soon as you see the question on your screen. Our second question today is, how much is your finance function struggling with the scale and complexity of your GL? A, not at all. B, a little. C, it's a growing concern. And D, a lot. Please be sure to click the submit button, which is located on the right side of your screen just below the response option. Let's see, that's a quick question. Hopefully our attendees can put down their thoughts on that one very quickly.
Yeah, and I think, as I was just saying, I think, I've seen over the years that, a number of organizations struggle with this because it is really around where you really want to position the general ledger in your finance architecture. Clearly, technology has helped because it has allowed more data to be captured. However, it really is that yes, on one side you've got additional data, but then on the other side you need to be performant and agile in terms of how you manage your finances as well. And that's where we're seeing that trend to really invest in subledgers to supplement the GL, not as a replacement for the GL, but absolutely to act as a complementary part of the architecture. So look, it'll be good to see the results on this one. And just given the poll question we had earlier, it'll be interesting to see how they obviously. That was focused around the accuracy of the data. This is a slightly different question focused on the finance architecture. So it will hopefully you'll see a different type of response.
Take a look.
Okay, so yeah, it's looking at the result. I mean, first observation for me is that 16% obviously is not at all, but actually. Therefore, for the majority, the scale and complexity of the GL is a level of concern. Obviously, it's a varying degrees of impact in terms of how that's being set up. Now, I think what we've seen is, particularly if you're in a regulated industry, I said like banking, insurance is where we see the most complex requirements. Firms have evolved over the last 5 to 10 years, and therefore that we'd expect now in at the start of 2023, a lot of firms have already either been on that journey and corrected where their GLs fit into their architecture. And then secondly, there's some obviously here on the other end of the scale, which are really looking at, major concern around GL complexity. And, I think Alan made a really valid point earlier. The sort of the history of the organization is really important here in terms of if you're looking at, obviously new companies, newly formed, new implementations of finance architecture, you'd expect them to be in the, not to necessarily have a problem in this area. Okay, if we continue on with our agenda. So different types of data. Now, this is a really interesting discussion because, again, I'll provide some of my background and experience in this area. Now, I come from a banking background. I think what we've seen in banking in particular has been there was always those core flows, as I mentioned, around very simplistic finance flows, what we called accounting data, which was the your events, turning those into journals, postings into the ledgers, which then generated obviously balance sheets and income statements. The growth we spoke about in data hasn't just been in terms of driving out additional granularity, it's also been additional dimensionality in that data. So, in the past, it may have been fine to just know that the transaction that you'd received was related to a particular customer. You didn't really need to know much information about that customer. What you're now finding is a lot of the new standards or reporting or, whether they're accounting standards, regulatory standards, do require additional dimensions to be captured alongside that data. And that's what we call non-accounted data or non-financial data. The criticality from a finance perspective is obviously how do those data sets come together to let you produce your outputs, whether they're, as I said, internal or external reporting. How do you produce those outputs in a way that can still meet all of your controls, transparency, and auditability requirements? So, I think it's absolutely critical when you're answering what your finance data architecture should look like. You do need to consider it in a wider context as well, because it is a lot around enterprise-wide alignment, whether you're looking to align with a risk function, a compliance function, an actuarial department. That becomes a really important factor to consider within the architectural view. Alan, do you want to just talk us through what could a finance architecture look like when you start to think about both accounted and non-accounted data?
Sure, happy to. So I think just before we move on to that, I was going to add that there are also other types of data, non-accounted data that are becoming the purview of finance departments, particularly thinking about ESG, economic, social and governance requirements. That really, that is non-accounted data at the moment. Some companies may be taking an accounted approach to it, but a lot of the requirements for that are sitting, responsibility for that are sitting with the finance function, and we expect, I think, that that's only going to increase. And I saw there was a question about analytics, which I think we'll address more fully soon. But when we talk about analytics, we're going to start talking more and more about that non-accounted data that relates to the accounted data. So I don't just want to know how much money I've made, but I'd like to know how that segments in different ways. If I'm a B2C business, who's driving it? Is it all being made from women in the Northwest region, in their 30 to 40 age bracket? Whatever the business is, you want to be able to analyze it to that level of detail. And those are the questions that, if they aren't being asked of finance departments already, will be asked very soon. And that non-accounted data and unifying it with the accounted data is going to be critical to achieving that. So in terms of the future finance architecture, this slide may look similar to what we were looking at before, but there are a couple of key differences, I think. The first one is that all of this, I think, has to be finance owned. So before, there are often questions about enterprise data lakes and enterprise-wide data lakes. Who owns that? Is it owned by finance? Is it owned externally? Who's controlling it? Who's setting the rules around that data? Really, whatever the data management solution selected is, it has to be finance owned, because, as I was saying, for ESG and for other aspects, finance is held accountable for this data, for the accuracy of the data, and for the impact that the analytics upon this data will have on the rest of the organization. That is the responsibility and accountability of finance. So they have to own the system. I think everyone would accept that they have to own the subledger, the accounting rules, and general ledger, but that data management is also critical. Should be cloud-based. That's the way things are going generally. It's where you get cheaper data. It's where you can flex the resources that are available. So if you're in an organization that has significantly increased data flows around month end, well, you've got cloud infrastructure, you should be able to handle that. You should be able to scale up and scale down to be able to handle that increased data at certain times of the month without incurring the cost of it through the quieter times. Modular is important. Modular is very important because we talk about this as finance transformation. What you want to do is go through one transformation, and then as things change, and things will certainly change, things always change, but as the requirements change, as be the regulatory requirements, be the internal requirements, you want to be able to add or remove parts of your infrastructure in a modular manner without having to go through another transformation. Transformations are hugely expensive, very difficult, very time consuming, and we see that there are many providers in the market. The approach is to have modular systems to be able to connect things via the new technologies that exist, APIs, etc. And that is really a big boon to finance departments if they take the right approach and pick best in breed at the various different stages, and really then look to modularize it and design it in that way with a forward-looking viewpoint. And finally, that it's scalable. You don't want to design for what you have today. You want to design for what you think you will have tomorrow. But again, you don't want to be paying today for volumes that you don't yet have. And again, the technology that exists today is ideal to enable it. So really, I think those are the four principles that I would sort of consider around the finance architecture. And the key here, I think, is looking to put the ownership of all of this in finance's hands, both at the macro and the micro level. So that I already spoke about owning the data management, the integrated data management, but also finance owning the accounting rules, finance being able to make those changes without going through a massive release cycle or whatever it might be, because that's the way that you minimize the manual adjustments. That's the way that you minimize the compensatory reconciliations and controls, is that when you spot a problem, you fix it. And if the financial controller or finance analyst is able to make that fix, more is the better. The fix will happen quicker, and it will mean that they only make the adjustment once for one day or for 1 month, rather than it being for 3, 4, 5 months over an increasing number of transactions as a business is growing.
Great, thanks, Alan. I think it's given us a great overview of the finance architecture. What will be interesting to understand is where some of our participants are now in terms of preparing themselves for finance architecture of the future. So Terry, over to you for poll 3.
Okay, thank you. Attendees may respond to this polling question immediately as I read through it. Our third polling question is, where are you with preparing your finance architecture for the future? A, just researching and learning. B, it's being considered by my organization, but nothing set in motion. C, the project is approved, but we have not yet started. D, we have started our future-ready finance architecture project. E, we're in the middle to late stages of the project. F, our project is complete. Please take a moment to submit your answer and click the submit button on the right side below the response options. And I'll also just throw in that don't forget to submit questions for our presenters today. Thank you.
So it's a longer list of options here. I do think we'll probably see that a relatively even split because as we said, different organizations have a very different finance architecture, and the sort of age of the organization will be really key as well. So that's a very interesting view. Should we look at the poll results? So yeah, it's yep.
Yes, so over 50% are in the first two categories. So not yet started. Which is, in fact, the C is also not yet started. So well over 50%, nearly 60% people haven't yet started, and that I think that's probably a fair reflection of the market. That people are absolutely waking up to the requirements, but many organizations are still gathering their information, looking at how they want to do things, looking at budgets, but haven't yet started to implement. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, no, agreed. And it's what we're seeing in the industry as well. I think just in terms of maturity of finance functions, there's been a huge investment in all digital technologies, architecture type areas across all areas of industry. Now, what we found is, finance has generally been a late adopter, generally a more conservative function. So generally in terms of adopting new technologies, new architectures, moving to cloud enabled technologies has been a slow adopter in that area. So not an entirely surprising outcome to see that actually, quite a few of our members are quite early in that journey. So hopefully some of the items we've covered today are good insights, obviously, into people who are starting off on that journey. One area, we've touched on this throughout. Obviously, we've spoken about the data, the architecture. I mentioned earlier in terms of the basics of a finance function still remain, and being that custodian, being that control area that is making sure your financial outputs are reconciled, they're correct, they're timely, absolutely essential. And I think one of the key things that Alan spoke about when we spoke about the sort of the target architecture is that need for auditability, traceability, the control aspect to it, and hence why finance ownership of this is really key. One of the key areas, just to give a good example of this, that we're exploring at the moment is the impact of ESG on a finance function, where we're seeing a lot more around obviously ESG reporting, regulations, and the need for standardization in terms of the outputs that firms provide. And there's still a lot of debate and discussion, obviously, in terms of what good looks like in that area. But what we're starting to see is that trend where we're saying actually finance functions need to be the owners and custodians of this information, because of how important it is, how essential it is to have the right controls over that data and the right transparency to make sure that actually the outputs produced are absolutely accurate and suitable for consumption by a really broad range of audiences. So I said that, I think that's a really important thing to consider as you embark on those finance transformation journeys and you start to consider what it means for your data and your finance systems architecture. Okay, Terry, over to you for the final poll question.
Okay, thank you. Please refresh your browser if you can't see the question, but today's final question is, looking ahead, what would benefit your finance function most? A, automation of manual processes to increase efficiency and reduce risk. B, a centralized, trusted, and accessible standardized data model. C, real-time finance, removal of batch processing, month/quarter end processing, so a continuous close real-time reporting. Or D, gaining access to trusted data to support the FP&A function and forward-looking activities. Please be sure to click the submit button, which is located on the right side of the screen, to record your options. Our audience says they're looking for.
So we intentionally kept this question at the end. I think it's a really good one to end on, because actually it really is around where's the benefit, where's the outcome, what is the thing that you see as the most important area that for a finance function. Now, again, the age, the complexity of the organization will obviously drive the sort of response here. You know, again, with the types of organizations I've worked at in the past, I think A and B would be, you know, high up on that list. But let's see what the poll results are. So yeah, automation of manual process. It ties back to the first response we had, I guess, on the first poll as well, in terms of where we saw the major challenge, and actually, therefore, no surprise to see that as the key area of benefit.
I was going to say it's very interesting that C is so high. I don't doubt that it would be beneficial. I'm interested to know where the blockers are. Is that in the finance architecture? Is it in the upstream architecture? Is it in the overall kind of operating model of finance? Because if you're going to move to real time, I think that it's not just about your technological architecture, but the general operating model and how you as a finance team set yourselves up to be able to handle that. But I do expect that over the next few years, more will answer C, hopefully as they mitigate the problems that they're seeing in categories A and B.
Yeah, I was going to make the same observation, Alan. I think the way the question's probably worded is really key here, because actually, absolutely, moving to real-time finance has a huge beneficial impact. I think it's our finance functions currently ready to do that, both in terms of, you said, the operating model, the process, the technology, the controls. We've not, at least with the organizations we work with at Aptitude, I've not seen an organization yet that we've seen that is yet ready to really move into a full real-time finance concept because of the complexity of that implementation. So, but completely agree from a benefits perspective, it drives, the future of finance really is looking at a real-time finance function. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. Terry.
Thank you, Nick and Alan. Attendees should see the evaluation survey now open on your screen. If it did not open, please click the evaluation survey icon on the bottom of your screen for access. We appreciate your feedback, so please complete the survey while we address some of the audience questions. And I'll remind you, if you haven't sent in some questions, go ahead and add them to the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. Okay, we'll start off with, we all know that the CFO mandate now includes the need to provide forward-looking statements, forward-looking strategic guidance based on business insights. It's easy to build a business case to invest in reporting and analytics solutions, but is this where the initial investment should be taking place?
Do you want to take that, Nick?
Yes, I mean, for me, absolutely. It's where it's really easy to look at reporting analytics and say that's where the value add is, and that's where the business benefits come from. I think it's equally important that when you're building that business case is to understand the dependencies you have. So in order to really deliver those outcomes, actually what you're going to need in place is the underlying data, what we spoke about in terms of the accounting flows, the non-accounted data, bringing that together to then really be able to invest heavily in your reporting analytics capabilities. I think without that investment in the data, it becomes really difficult to deliver the benefits. I think the two do have to go hand in hand, and you do need to consider it end to end.
Yeah, and I think that, ironically, the tools that are available today in terms of reporting and analytics make it even more critical that you get the underlying data right. Because we have such powerful tools in the analytics space, in the AI space, etc., but they're absolutely useless if the data isn't accurate. So it's a question of kind of garbage in and garbage out. You don't want that to be garbage in. You want it to be accuracy in and insights out, if you like. And that is, it certainly would be a mistake not to focus on the data, but as a means to achieving the end of having that serious, heavy-hitting analytics function building out in your finance department.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Next question. Can you describe some of the real-world business benefits you've seen clients experience as a result of moving toward the data nirvana you speak about today?
The main one for me, and I can talk from my experience in this space, is getting to that single trusted source of data that every finance team uses. I previously worked in a large banking organization where you have numerous different teams that may be siloed by functional areas, or but all of them have the same need for underlying data and analytics capabilities. Now, the real benefit, I think, where that finance data nirvana we described is key, is getting to that single view of data, which is consistent, accurate, reconciled, but meets the needs of everyone in finance. There is nothing worse in a finance function than having, I think Alan mentioned this earlier, is having two users who are doing reporting or analytics of some form and making decisions off the back of that data, but actually they're drawing different conclusions because actually you have got two different outputs or two different data sets that they're looking at. So consistency is really important then. I think that's what that data nirvana sort of drives you towards.
Okay, thank you. Just looking at the time, we have time for one more question. Is there a danger of increasing IT complexity hindering agility with the introduction of another layer of data technology, such as a data warehouse or data lake? Is this the right approach to enable finance and other stakeholders to access granular level data for FP&A and to drive business insights?
I think that there is a danger, but only if it's not done in the correct way. So if the systems are put in place with an holistic approach to the business architecture, with a view over exactly how the flows should happen and where the different types of data should reside, and it's not just layered on top of the existing architecture, the potentially legacy systems, then it should be value add. It shouldn't add complexity. It should actually reduce complexity, particularly with the types of system and the technology that exists today. And that's where I think we start to talk about the modular finance architecture. So if it's done in the right way, and it's not just, oh, here's something shiny and new that I want to add into my architecture, but rather I want to rethink my architecture and design it and make it fit for purpose, then there shouldn't be that danger. It should absolutely be noticeably value add.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. Looking at the time, I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'd like to thank our presenters, Nick Shaw and Alan Berkeley, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. We're very appreciative that they have made time for IMA and our audience today. And also, thank you, Terry Mormile, for moderating today's event. And once again, thank you, Aptitude Software, for presenting today's webinar, and thank you all for your participation in today's event, your commitment to IMA, and your professional development through IMA's Inside Talk webinar series. I look forward to spending time with you again soon when we'll enjoy some more Inside Talk.